The hum of passing cars filled the air as the sun began its slow descent, painting the horizon in hues of amber and violet. A woman stood by the side of a desolate highway, her silhouette outlined by the fading light. Her car sat idly a few feet away, its hood propped open like a failed promise. She glanced at her phone, its battery indicator flashing red, her lifeline to the outside world fading fast. The vastness of the road stretched ahead, empty and unyielding, as if mocking her predicament. Her name was Angela. 34 years old, dressed in a simple black blouse and jeans that were now smudged with grease, she looked every bit like someone grappling with a situation far outside her comfort zone. Her auburn hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, tendrils escaping to frame her face, dampened by a mixture of sweat and the growing chill of the evening. Angela's hazel eyes flickered between frustration and anxiety, betraying the weight of the day. The highway was eerily quiet, its vast expanse interrupted only by the occasional roar of a speeding car. Dusk was settling in, and the stretch of asphalt seemed endless, bordered by fields that swayed lazily under the breeze. The isolation was palpable, oppressive even. Angela's car, a decade-old sedan she had affectionately named Ruby, now seemed to mock her with its lifeless state. The steam rising from the engine mingled with the evening air, dissipating into nothingness, much like her hope of getting home anytime soon. Angela was on her way back from her sister's baby shower, a celebration that had been equal parts joy and exhaustion. She had stayed later than planned, caught up in conversations and promises to visit more often. Now, miles away from her destination and her family, she stood stranded, feeling the weight of her decisions. She hadn't bothered to charge her phone the night before. She hadn't checked Ruby's engine in months. She hadn't thought to take an alternate route when her GPS warned of minimal cell service in this area. Her stomach churned with a gnawing sense of helplessness. It wasn't just the car. It was everything. The job she had just quit without a backup plan. The rent she was behind on. The argument she had with her best friend 2 weeks ago that left them not speaking. Standing here, stranded on this barren stretch of highway, all those burdens seemed to coalesce into a singular, suffocating weight. Angela hugged herself against the cooling air, her breath forming faint clouds in the dimming light. She knew she had to figure something out soon, but the enormity of the situation made her feel frozen, as if the asphalt beneath her feet had hardened into quicksand. Just then, the faint sound of an approaching vehicle broke through her spiral of thoughts. Her head shot up, and for the first time in what felt like hours, her pulse quickened, not in fear, but in the faintest glimmer of hope. The faint rumble of an approaching engine grew louder, cutting through the stillness of the deserted highway. Angela squinted into the dim light, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and trepidation. The vehicle slowed as it neared, the bright beams of its headlights momentarily blinding her. It wasn't the sleek, impersonal blur of a passing sports car or the roaring indifference of a truck. This was different. The vehicle rolled to a gentle stop a few feet ahead of her, a rugged SUV that looked like it had seen its fair share of off-road adventures. The driver's side door opened, and a figure stepped out. Angela instinctively tensed. She was alone, vulnerable, and the thought of trusting a stranger out here felt as daunting as the broken-down car behind her. But then she saw him, broad shoulders, a distinct stride, and a face that felt oddly familiar. "Need some help?" The man's voice carried a calm authority, its timbre steady yet approachable. It was a voice she had heard countless times before, though never in person. Her mind scrambled to connect the dots as he moved closer, the light from his vehicle illuminating his face. The bald head, the thick beard, the undeniable presence. It clicked. "Joe Rogan?" Angela asked, her voice cracking with disbelief. He nodded, a faint grin tugging at the corner of his lips. "That's me. Looks like Ruby's giving you a hard time." He motioned toward her car, his tone light yet grounded. His casual acknowledgement of the situation had a disarming effect on her. For a moment, Angela didn't care about the absurdity of a famous podcaster and comedian stopping to help her on an empty highway. She just wanted to believe this was real. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she stammered, "Yeah, the car just. It overheated, I think. And my phone's about to die. I didn't know what else to do." Joe nodded thoughtfully, his hands resting on his hips as he surveyed the vehicle. "All right, let's take a look. Got tools in the back of my car. We'll figure this out." His confidence was infectious, but it was his demeanor that struck Angela most. There was no trace of condescension, no impatience or arrogance. He wasn't treating her like an inconvenience. He was just there, in the moment, offering help. Angela watched as he walked back to his SUV, her earlier anxiety giving way to cautious optimism. This wasn't what she had expected when the car broke down, but maybe, just maybe, it was exactly what she needed. As Joe rummaged through the back of his SUV, Angela stood awkwardly by the side of the road, her arms crossed tightly against the growing chill. The surreal nature of the moment hadn't fully settled in. Sure, she recognized Joe Rogan. Who didn't? His podcast was a cultural phenomenon, his voice synonymous with deep dives into everything from MMA to astrophysics. But this wasn't some episode on YouTube or Spotify. This was real life, and he was here, sleeves rolled up, ready to fix her car. Angela's mind wrestled with conflicting emotions. On the one hand, she was grateful. She had been bracing herself for hours of waiting or, worse, walking down the highway in search of help. But on the other hand, a familiar doubt gnawed at her, the same one that had haunted her through failed relationships, an unfulfilling job, and the countless times life seemed to stack the odds against her. Why would anyone, let alone someone like him, take the time to help her? Was she just a burden in his otherwise full and successful life? Joe broke her train of thought as he approached with a toolbox in hand. All right, let's see what's going on here, he said, crouching in front of the car. He glanced up at her, his tone casual yet reassuring. You know, I've been stranded more times than I care to admit. Once in the middle of the desert, no water, no phone. Makes this look like a walk in the park. Angela chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or apologize. Well, I hope this isn't too much trouble. I'm sure you've got somewhere important to be. Joe shook his head as he began inspecting the engine. Nah, I was just heading home. Got some elk meat defrosting and a new bottle of bourbon waiting. The peep. Besides, what kind of guy would I be if I drove past someone in need? His words, delivered without an ounce of pretense, hit Angela harder than she expected. She realized how long it had been since someone had shown her kindness without strings attached. Still, her insecurities lingered. She found herself blurting out, I'm not usually this unprepared. It's been a rough couple of weeks. Joe looked up briefly, his expression calm but attentive. Rough weeks happen, he said simply, turning his attention back to the engine. Doesn't mean you have to go through them alone. The simplicity of his words was disarming. Angela bit her lip, feeling a lump rise in her throat. She hated how raw and exposed she felt in front of a stranger, especially one whose life seemed so far removed from hers. But as Joe worked on the car, his hands steady, his demeanor unfazed by the grind or the task at hand, she couldn't deny the sense of relief washing over her. Externally, the challenge was obvious. Ruby wasn't going anywhere without serious intervention. But the bigger obstacle, Angela realized, wasn't under the hood of her car. It was the weight she carried within herself, the self-doubt, the fear of being seen as weak or incapable. As Joe worked quietly, she found herself battling that internal voice that constantly questioned her worth. Could she accept help without feeling like she owed something in return? Could she let go of the nagging belief that kindness was always transactional? Joe's voice broke the silence. Looks like your coolant's low and the engine overheated. I can refill it enough to get you to the next gas station, but you'll probably need a mechanic to check for leaks. Angela nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you. Joe smiled as he wiped his hands on a rag. You'd have figured it out. People are tougher than they think. His words were simple, but in that moment, they felt like more than just a statement. They felt like a challenge. One Angela wasn't sure she was ready to meet, but one she knew she needed to. Angela watched as Joe refilled the coolant with the steady precision of someone who had done this more times than he cared to count. He worked in silence for a while, occasionally glancing at her to explain what he was doing, though he didn't seem to expect much of a response. For Angela, the quiet felt safe, as if the absence of conversation gave her space to process the strange, overwhelming emotions stirring within her. I think that should do it for now, Joe said, straightening up and dusting his hands off. Give it about 10 minutes to cool down, and we'll start it up. See how she runs. Angela nodded, her arms still crossed tightly across her chest. Thank you. Really. I'm not sure how I got so lucky. Joe chuckled, leaning casually against the car. Luck's funny like that. Sometimes it's about being in the right place at the right time. Other times, it's just about being open to it. He paused, studying her for a moment. You okay? You've been pretty quiet. She hesitated, her first instinct to dismiss his question with a practiced smile and an empty reassurance. But something about his tone, the way he asked as if he genuinely cared, made her stop. She exhaled deeply, her breath visible now in the cooling evening air. It's just been a lot lately, she admitted, her voice low but steady. Losing my job, falling behind on bills, feeling like I can't catch a break. And now this. She gestured to the car, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. It's like the universe is trying to tell me I'm not doing anything right. Joe nodded, his expression thoughtful but not pitying. Life has a way of piling it on, doesn't it? Makes you feel like you're drowning, even when you're doing your best to stay afloat. She looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his words. Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing, he continued, crossing his arms. It's not about how many times life knocks you down. It's about what you do when you're on the ground. You gotta ask yourself, are you gonna stay there, or are you gonna get up? Angela swallowed hard, the simplicity of his words hitting her like a tidal wave. She felt tears prickling the corners of her eyes and quickly blinked them away, embarrassed. That's easier said than done. Of course it is, Joe said, his voice softening. But the hard stuff's what makes it worth it. I've talked to a lot of people, from athletes to scientists to regular folks just trying to get by. And you know what they all have in common? They don't quit. Even when it's messy, even when it's hard, they find a way to keep moving. His words weren't groundbreaking or overly profound, but they carried a weight that made Angela pause. For so long, she had felt like she was spinning her wheels, trying to prove to the world, and to herself, that she was capable. Hearing someone acknowledge the struggle without sugarcoating it felt oddly validating. As the car cooled, the two of them stood in companionable silence, the hum of crickets and the faint glow of distant headlights filling the gaps in conversation. For the first time in weeks, Angela felt something shift within her, a glimmer of resilience she thought she had lost. When Joe finally gave her the green light to start the car, Angela slid into the driver's seat, her fingers trembling slightly as she turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life. She let out a shaky laugh, relief flooding her senses. Joe leaned into the open window, a grin on his face. See? Rudy's got some fight in her yet. Just like you. Angela felt her throat tighten, a mixture of gratitude and emotion she couldn't quite articulate. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with sincerity. Not just for this, but everything. He nodded, stepping back. Take care of yourself, Angela, and don't let the rough weeks get the best of you. You've got more fight in you than you think. As she drove away, the headlights of her car cutting through the darkness, Angela couldn't shake his words. They weren't a solution to all her problems, but they were a spark, a reminder that even in the hardest moments, there was always a way forward. Angela pulled into the dimly lit gas station Joe had mentioned, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. She sat for a moment, the engine idling, her mind replaying his words over and over. You've got more fight in you than you think. The quiet sincerity of that statement hung heavy in her chest, forcing her to confront something she had been avoiding for far too long, herself. She stepped out of the car and walked toward the convenience store, her movements slow, deliberate. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she grabbed a bottle of water and approached the counter. The young clerk greeted her with a friendly smile, but Angela barely noticed. Her mind was racing. For so long, she had been stuck in a cycle of doubt, fear, and inaction. Her job had drained her, but she had stayed because it felt safer than starting over. Her relationships had frayed, but she told herself it was easier to let them fade than to fight for them. Even now, as she stood under the harsh glow of the gas station lights, she felt the weight of every decision, every misstep, every moment she had let pass her by. But tonight was different. Something Joe had said lingered. It's not about how many times life knocks you down. It's about what you do when you're on the ground. Angela realized that she had been waiting for someone or something to pull her up, to fix the mess she felt trapped in. But maybe it wasn't about waiting. Maybe it was about standing up on her own. As she walked back to her car, she caught her reflection in the store window. For the first time in weeks, she really looked at herself, messy hair, tired eyes, and all. She didn't see failure. She saw someone who was still here, still standing despite everything. And that meant something. Back in the car, Angela reached for her phone, now connected to the charging cable Joe had handed her. The screen flickered on, and she hesitated, her fingers hovering over the contacts. She scrolled down to her best friend's name and stared at it for a moment, her heart pounding. It had been weeks since their argument, weeks of stubborn silence and unspoken hurt. But tonight, Angela decided she wasn't going to let her pride get in the way. She tapped the name and held the phone to her ear, the dial tone loud in the quiet car. When her friend answered, her voice tentative but familiar, Angela felt a lump rise in her throat. Hey, she began, her voice trembling. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. The conversation that followed wasn't easy. There were pauses, hesitations, and moments of vulnerability that made Angela's chest ache. But by the time she hung up, there was something new, a lightness, a sense of possibility she hadn't felt in ages. As she started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, Angela felt the full weight of the turning point she had just experienced. This wasn't just about fixing her car or making a phone call. This was about reclaiming the parts of herself she had let slip away. The spark Joe had ignited wasn't just about getting back on the road. It was about choosing to move forward in every sense of the word. The highway stretched ahead of her, dark and open, but Angela no longer felt daunted by the unknown. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be, not just on the road, but in her life. And as the miles passed beneath her wheels, she knew she had taken the first step towards something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The morning sun began to rise, its golden light spreading across the horizon as Angela pulled into her apartment complex. Her body was exhausted from the long, tumultuous night, but her mind was strangely calm. She turned off the engine and sat in the driver's seat for a moment, the silence around her a stark contrast to the emotional whirlwind she had just experienced. She thought about Joe, about his steady confidence, and the way he had offered help without hesitation or expectation. His words echoed in her mind, not as cliches, but as truths she had long ignored. She realized now that life didn't have to be an endless series of battles fought alone. Struggle wasn't a mark of failure, it was a mark of resilience, and while the thought of facing her challenges still felt daunting, it no longer felt impossible. Angela stepped out of her car, glancing at Ruby. The old Satan had been through a lot, and so had she. She traced her fingers along the hood, a small smile forming. Guess we've both got some miles left in us, she murmured softly before heading inside. Her apartment was as she had left it, cluttered, chaotic, a physical manifestation of the inner turmoil she had been carrying for months. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt a quiet determination. She set her keys on the counter, grabbed a notepad from the kitchen drawer, and sat down at the table. On the first line she wrote, "Things I can do today." It wasn't about fixing everything at once. She knew better than to expect that. But she could start. She listed practical steps: call the mechanic, update her resume, reach out to her landlord for a payment plan. Then, on a separate line, she wrote, "Things I want to do." That list was harder, but it felt just as important. She jotted down, reconnect with friends, start painting again, go for a run. Simple things, but they felt like small promises to herself. After a quick shower and a change of clothes, Angela made the first call to the mechanic. The conversation was straightforward, and though it didn't solve all her problems, it felt like progress. Later, she updated her resume, applying to 2 jobs she had been too intimidated to consider before. With each small action, the weight she had been carrying seemed to lighten, piece by piece. By the afternoon, Angela found herself standing in front of an easel she hadn't touched in months. A blank canvas stared back at her, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel intimidating. She picked up a brush, dipped it into a swirl of blues and greens, and let her hand move instinctively. The paint flowed in imperfect lines, but she didn't care. This wasn't about perfection, it was about trying, about creating, about being. As the day turned to evening, Angela reflected on how far she had come in just 24 hours. It wasn't the kind of transformation that could be measured in monumental shifts or grand gestures. It was quieter, subtler. A series of choices to keep going, to keep fighting, even when it felt easier to give up. And it all started with a man who stopped on the side of the road, offering kindness without judgment. That night, as she lay in bed, Angela's phone buzzed with a new text. It was from her best friend. "Thanks for calling. I missed you." She smiled, her chest warm with gratitude. She wasn't just repairing her car, her career, or her relationships. She was repairing herself. For the first time in weeks, Angela fell asleep with a sense of peace. She didn't have all the answers, but she had something just as valuable: the willingness to keep moving forward. And that, she realized, was everything. The following week unfolded like the beginning of a new chapter Angela hadn't expected to write. Her life didn't miraculously transform overnight, but each day brought small, meaningful steps forward. Her car was back from the mechanic, the resume updates had led to a promising interview, and her rekindled friendship felt like a lifeline she didn't know she needed. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but Angela was beginning to embrace the idea that progress didn't have to be perfect to be worthwhile. On a quiet Saturday morning, Angela found herself standing by Ruby in her apartment parking lot. She opened the hood, the engine gleaming after its recent repairs. For a moment, she just stared at it, the memory of that night on the highway still vivid in her mind. She thought about how easily things could have gone differently, how she might have given in to despair, how Joe Rogan might have just driven by. But he hadn't. He had stopped, and that simple act of kindness had set everything into motion. Angela glanced at her phone and hesitated before dialing a number she had saved just a few days earlier. She didn't know if Joe would even remember her, let alone answer, but something inside her compelled her to try. The phone rang twice before his familiar, gravelly voice came through the line. "Hello." "Hi, Joe," Angela said, her voice faltering slightly. "It's Angela, from the highway." There was a beat of silence before he spoke, his tone warm with recognition. "Angela, how's Ruby holding up?" She laughed, the sound light and unforced. "She's doing great, thanks to you. I just wanted to say thank you again. For everything. You probably don't realize how much that night meant to me, but it wasn't just about the car. You reminded me that I wasn't as stuck as I thought I was." Joe's voice softened. "You didn't need me to remind you. You already had it in you. Sometimes we just need someone to show us the mirror." Angela felt her throat tighten, a lump forming as the weight of his words settled over her. "Well, you did that for me. So, thank you. Really." "Anytime," Joe said. And remember, it's not about the big leaps. It's the small steps that get you where you're going. You've got this. Angela hung up feeling lighter, more grounded than she had in months. She looked at Ruby, then at the sky, where the morning sun filtered through wisps of clouds, bathing the world in a soft, golden light. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel proud, not just of surviving, but of choosing to move forward. She climbed into Ruby's driver's seat and started the engine. The familiar rumble felt like an old friend, steady and reliable. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she wasn't just driving to her next destination. She was driving toward a life she was ready to rebuild, one deliberate step at a time. And as the open road stretched before her, Angela knew this was only the beginning. Her journey wasn't defined by where she had been, but by where she was going. And wherever that was, she was ready to face it, not because someone had fixed her car, but because someone had reminded her she had the strength to fix herself.